Your Royal Highness, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, it is a very great privilege to speak for the fifth successive time as Minister responsible for Rural Affairs, Biosecurity and Animal Health. I thank Tim Brigstock, Georgina Crossman and their team who organised this seminal event in the equine calendar, this year in rather different circumstances. Both as Minister and with a long life interest, I'm keenly aware of the benefits that equines bring to each of us personally and to the country. When I spoke last March, we were all unaware of quite how drastically our lives would be affected by COVID-19. A year that has been very hard for all of us in different ways. Nonetheless, throughout the pandemic, I've been continuously impressed by the innovative and pragmatic approaches adopted by the equine world. Where possible, the government has given support to all areas of the economy, and the equine sector has worked tirelessly to ensure that equines have been protected and their welfare safeguarded. It is particularly encouraging to see those organisations responsible for equine welfare working collaboratively to safeguard the well-being of animals in their care. I'm grateful to them for keeping me regularly updated on their analysis of the developing situation and sharing their surveys of the sector, particularly in relation to ongoing capacity and financial stability. The most recent surveys suggest that the picture on equine welfare is much better than feared. That's very welcome news indeed. However, I recognise that rescue centres are operating at capacity, and we remain engaged both on short-term and long-term issues. The National Equine Welfare Council, the Pet Plan Charitable Trust, the RSPCA, the Donkey Sanctuary, Red Wings, World Horse Welfare and the British Horse Society must be applauded for the COVID-19 Equine Rescues Emergency Fund they set up to help. In addition to this emergency funding, the British Horse Society set up a hardship fund for their approved premises to help them meet the costs associated with maintaining the health and well-being of their horses and ponies. I thank the BHS for their ongoing collaboration with the government to identify the implications that the changing COVID-19 restrictions have had on various equestrian activities. This has enabled us to ensure that the welfare of equines is reflected and safeguarded within government guidance and legislation. I'd also like to highlight the good work of the Racehorse Owners Association, which launched its Racehorse Relief Fund back in October. Not only will the fund assist owners and trainers in meeting their costs, but it is also intended to prevent horses being abandoned. On the subject of racehorses, I was pleased to hear that the British Horse Racing Authority are focusing on delivering many of the recommendations of the Horse Welfare Board's strategic plan. I wish the BHA every success in this and look forward to hearing about their progress. 2020 also saw notable changes to the equine ID system in this country, with a move towards greater digitisation. I'm very keen to develop a more effective equine traceability regime, which supports robust animal welfare, public health and disease control. In order to make the central equine database, which records details of horses and their owners, more effective, we must make it easier for owners to access and update their data. The opening up of the digital stable portal and smartphone app to all owners, which I'm sure Stuart Everett will mention later, is a key step in this direction. You will hear of the government's ambitions to do more with identification data and for industry to use this data from Simon Hall from the Livestock Information Service. These digital developments, coupled with our communications campaign to promote microchipping of equines in England, have already started to bear fruit. Equine passport issuing organisations will need to embrace developments in technology to allow them to interact more effectively with the central database and their customers. We have begun discussions with the industry about further improvements that can be made. We plan to consult more widely on this later this year and will welcome views of those present today and other horse owners and businesses. Turning to our international regime, the new year brought major change to the movement of equines. Ministers and officials have been working with the equine world to resolve issues and to help them adjust to new processes. I much appreciate the close working relationship with the British Horse Council as we've gone about the process of getting prepared. The Council has worked tirelessly to represent the views of the wider equine industry to government and has been instrumental in supporting the dissemination of government messaging about EU exit. For those that are still having problems, I can assure you that we are working to fix these. I recognise that some challenges remain. However, we will work with the British Horse Council to take action. Those who have concerns should engage with the Council so that we are able to have considered feedback. Of course, the UK's departure from the European Union offers significant opportunities to improve our domestic regime and standards. It is important that this work is undertaken in the right way. My department will be working with industry to co-design our new regime to ensure that it works correctly, enhances our standards, and of course safeguards the interests of the horse. It is with this in mind that the UK and Welsh governments have recently consulted on proposals to end the practice of exporting livestock and horses for slaughter or fattening. This is a manifesto commitment, and we hope to have corresponding legislation in place by the end of the year. The consultation also included questions on broader improvements to animal welfare during transport, including on maximum journey times, space and headroom during transport, and rules on transporting animals in extreme temperatures. We will ensure the results of the consultation are used to improve animal welfare. Agriculture. As a member of the NFU, I'm naturally pleased to see that Minette Batters is the next speaker. Agriculture has long been associated with the horse. Indeed, the Suffolk Punch class is my first port of call at the Suffolk Show. The Agriculture Act 2020, which I took through the House of Lords last year, provides opportunities for our native breeds to be supported. It also includes significant opportunity for improved access for riding as part of our vision for farming and the countryside. I should not conclude without reference to my important responsibility for biosecurity. We lost the Animal Health Trust last year, but I am encouraged that within industry, the vital work the Trust undertook is protected, and I look forward to hearing more about this. Through continuing to work together and striving for higher standards of equine health and welfare, I'm also confident that the United Kingdom will be able to show the world that it can not only remain a global leader in equine endeavours, but also further enhance its premier status. There is not one of us at this forum that has not been inspired by the horse. The horse is a great leveller. I look forward to working with you to ensure that people from all communities, from all parts of our country, can enjoy what we have treasured. So may I wish you every success, not only with the forum today, but also as we advance the interests of the horse in its many forms of activity. I have always wanted to remain as long as I possibly can at the forum meetings. And the problem for today is that I have to go or have to attend the House to answer a question on fisheries. So I hope everyone will forgive me for not staying as long as I would wish, but I wish everyone success, not only, as I say today, but also as we work with horses through the SCA and beyond and advance their interests. Thank you.
Our second speaker today is Minette Batters, President of the National Farmers Union. Some of you will know that at their annual conference last week, the report of Levelling Up Rural Britain was launched. It's always seemed to me, coming from a commercial farming background, that the equine sector needs to work much closer with the farming sector. So I'm especially delighted that Minette has agreed to discuss the topic of agriculture and equestrianism. Minette, over to you.
Many thanks, Tim. Your Royal Highness, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, it's an enormous privilege to be speaking to you all today, and I'm just so sorry that it's in the virtual arena yet again, but the green shoots are coming, so hopefully it won't be much longer and we won't be doing this again next year, let's hope. But it is, as I said, a great pleasure for me to be speaking to you today, and my background has been as much involved really as with horses as it has with agriculture. I was brought up on the farm that I farm on now. I'm very much a life of ponies and horses. I was longlisted for the British junior eventing team. I was very involved with racehorses. I worked for David Ellsworth for quite a long time, and I worked for James Toller as assistant trainer. So I've got to ride some wonderful horses over the years. And indeed, horses are still a key part of my life now, and my children both ride as well. So I feel that leaves me quite well placed at the moment to know the challenges of horses, the challenges of agriculture. I think probably many on the call would agree that they don't always go together. My father was always absolutely adamant that horses were quite honestly a blimmin' nuisance as far as the farm was concerned. And certainly growing up, I felt that large machinery was a major challenge with the horse setup. And that really is how it's continued to a certain extent. But I wanted to touch today on the major time of change, I guess, that is ahead, because I think there is risk, there is opportunity, but what this is about more than anything else is a time of change. And we've all probably been quite good at kicking the can down the road for a while. That can kicking is coming to an end. The change is going to happen. And from my point of view, as president of the National Farmers Union, it is about managing that change. So working as closely as we can to influence government policy to make sure that the change can be managed. And there are so many moving parts to all of this, but really just to start at the beginning, because the Agricultural Act of 2020, which achieved royal assent on the 11th of November last year, and you've heard from Lord Gardiner, who of course had the very, very challenging time of taking the bill through the Lords, which was, those of you that witnessed it, it was no mean feat on Lord Gardiner's part. But it sets the framework for a very different future. And agricultural acts don't come along every day of the week. The last one was in 1947, when, of course, we were only 30% self-sufficient in food. Europe had been starving and we were rationing food here. And many people had lived through those challenges. And here we are now, 2021, and we are 60% self-sufficient. Food has never been more affordable. We have the third most affordable food in the world, the most affordable food in Europe. We have very high standards of animal welfare, environmental protection, and food safety. So it's been an enormous success story. And we have to make sure at this moment in time that we manage the transition well. And there are many influences in all of this. You'd be forgiven, as many of my members feel at the moment, that nothing has changed. We went through various no-deal planning scenarios. Here we are, we've left the EU, and nobody really in the countryside is feeling too much change. They're feeling enormous challenge, of course, on the back of COVID, with the horse sector completely shut down, as indeed is everything else. But I don't think anybody feeling too much of the change bit that I talked about. But by the end of the year, the Australian trade deal, the New Zealand trade deal will all be through. Those free trade agreements will all be finalised. And they will have impact without a doubt, because we will be importing more raw ingredients onto our shores, and exports for us as farmers will become very important in order to spread our risk. But what I take enormous heart from is actually two things here. COVID has really shone a spotlight on the countryside, and I'm going to come on to access in a minute. But it is also shone a spotlight on the importance of British food and British food production. So last year we monitor a lot of the OnePoll surveying, and last year OnePoll, with the people they surveyed, 86% of people surveyed said we should be producing more of our own food here in Britain. So that was an 11% leap from the previous year. We also saw in 2020, when we ran a food standards petition that was basically saying that we don't want to see food imported that is produced to standards that will be illegal to produce here. We want to make sure that trade is fair and fair for everyone. And we set off this campaign, and within 2 weeks in June, it had recorded 1 million signatures. So it's one of the largest petitions that's been seen in that time frame. And to put that into context, that is 1 in 60 people in this country that were saying we don't want to see our farmers undermined. And of course, it has been great for me to see on record various times our Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Secretary of State for International Trade Liz Truss, and George Eustice, Secretary of State and Defra, committing to not undermining our farmers in future free trade agreements. But what I said at the beginning, we will be opened up to change, because we will be importing many more ingredients onto our shores. My focus, of course, is keeping our farmers and growers as the #1 supplier of choice to the UK market, because in doing that, I think it's important that we recognise the processing and manufacturing that is in this country that underpins the whole of the country. So 70% of Great Britain is rural. And without agriculture, you don't have the processing, the manufacturing. They are here because the raw ingredients are here. And of course, we've got some very vulnerable, very iconic, very isolated parts of Great Britain, of which agriculture is so important to maintain that economic value. And when I look to the opportunities around tourism, people potentially not going away for perhaps the next decade like they have done in the past, enormous opportunities to allow more access into the countryside. And this leads me on to, one of the sort of key points that I wanted to make about this transition period. So the government has set out a 7-year transition period to separate us away from the common agricultural policy and direct support into the environmental land management scheme, and ultimately public monies for public goods. And we at the NFU believe that access has a strong role in all of these public monies for public goods. And indeed, COVID has again brought, I think, a spotlight onto the countryside, and it has restored and revitalised many, many members of the public who have been able to do two things: buy food in retail and go for walks in the countryside. And I think that has been a double-edged sword, if I'm honest. I mean, on my farm, I have to say everybody has stuck to the footpaths, and I've been absolutely delighted to welcome people across the farm. But there have been challenges. We are seeing a lot of feeding of animals. So I've got horses that are on a footpath. I've got winter grazing polo ponies, and I do regularly see people feeding the ponies. And that, of course, is a concern as to what they are feeding them. And we're putting signs up to try and make sure people behave responsibly. But I caught somebody feeding a cheese and tomato sandwich to one of my rams the other day, who has just become a sort of footpath addict, and he comes roaring across the field waiting for every passerby. Yes, cheese and tomato sandwich was a new one, but this is a concern, obviously, with people feeding animals along our footpaths and bridleways. And I think there is a real need for us to work collectively together as equine and agriculture in sort of rebooting the countryside code. So we're already talking to Defra and Natural England about how we can really energise the countryside code and access points. And I know as a horse rider myself, one thing that I am finding is there are many more people running. Running is actually not too bad, I'm finding, with the horses, but cyclists is always a bit of a challenge. Those that warn you when they are coming, it's fine, but those that don't, obviously it leads to, you know, a horse often being spooked. And certainly with young horses, I think the access to the countryside, I don't ride out now at the moment at weekends because there are just so many people out. I just feel that it's really actually not that safe. So this countryside code and working together and making sure that we all use the countryside responsibly is going to be very, very important. The second point that I wanted to make is really around the role of ponies. Now, I see Chris Packham very much talking about the importance of the role of ponies and non-native ones. And what we would say is native ponies have a very important role to play in managing the landscape. And indeed, if you look at Dartmoor or Exmoor, or where I am, which is right on the very edge of the New Forest, native ponies have played a very, very important role in managing those landscapes. But they are very much part of. We would not want to see too many. I know on the New Forest, everything that is on the New Forest has had to be managed. I remember as a teenager and as a child growing up, seeing some pretty, you know, desperate situations with ponies that didn't have enough to eat. And, you know, we had a lot of welfare problems. And this was, I think, very much the same right across the country. It's very different now because, of course, we manage the stocking density of everything, and there are not welfare issues. But this is a core point to sticking with native breeds. Native breeds are hardy and designed to manage in these very rugged and raw environments in a way that your domesticated pony, the non-native breeds, are not. I think it's also important to remember that, you know, when I talked about at the beginning, affordable food, you know, we've not seen any food inflation really in the last 20 years. We pay less for our food out of our income than we've ever done. It used to be 30% back in the 70s and early 80s. Now it's less than 10%. It's about 8% of our annual income. So food's never been more affordable. We want to make sure that farmers have access to the things that can make them money. So not just about ponies, but also beef and sheep being recognised in these systems as well, because that ultimately is what is going to bring the money in. There is always a welfare challenge, and making sure that we are working responsibly with everybody to manage the welfare situation of all our grazing animals. So I just wanted to pick up that point on native ponies, because right across the country, I think it is a very important part, but part is the key word. The final point that I would finish with is that we are four nations, rather, one country. So with Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales and England, and of course we have devolved way of working. But what is essential, again, for agriculture and for the equine sector is that we have a common approach across those four different nations. The worst thing we will ever do is to actually have very, very different systems in those countries. Now, already Northern Ireland is in a different place and is probably going to remain in a different place. But as far as GB is concerned, we must make sure that there is a common framework agreed. Now, I speak very closely to my colleagues in Scotland, and we are the Union of England and Wales, although Wales has its own president, John Davis, who's president of NFU Cymru. But this is going to be a very important point for all of us. And the need to work together, the need to work collaboratively together, I see within the farming sector. You know, farmers have very much traded independently. We need to collaborate. We need to be able to buy together, to sell together, and to really work together right across the country. That, I believe, will be enormously beneficial, not only to the policies that we want to drive forwards, but also to the health and well-being of the nation. And I speak to many farmers right now who are feeling very concerned about the future. Uncertainty always brings concern. And I think, when I look to the role of the equine sector and the role of the agricultural sector, these are long-term businesses. So we've got to look to the future. We've got to work collaboratively together. And just finish by thanking you so much for allowing me to be with you today. It's fair to say that my team, when they saw the invite, they said, "Oh, that's the equine sector. We don't need to work with them." I said, "Well, I think we do, and it's very much part of my past and my present, and I think there's a real need for us to work together." So I just really appreciate that chance to be with you all today. Thank you so much for listening.
Minette, thank you very much. That was a really interesting and inspiring talk that illustrates just how the opportunities that exist in a post-Brexit world. There have been a number of questions really about how farming and equestrianism can work more closely together in terms of renting out their land, allowing greater access, that sort of thing. Perhaps you could address that.
Tim, absolutely. I mean, I think we've already seen growing diversification, if you like, on farming businesses with many more. I look in my part of the world in South Wiltshire, and it's changed a lot over the years. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for it to change more. I make the point that, farms and horses don't always go that well together, and both have to share the sort of same ambition. That the farmer has to be able to work with the horse side of things, and people with horses need to be able to work with the farm side of things, and those are not always marriages made in heaven, but they can be. That's the whole point. They can be, but both sides, for farmers, they don't just need to see it as an extra resource opportunity, diversified income. They have really, like all diversifications, have to really believe in it and really want that level of engagement. And that doesn't suit every farming business by a long way. So I think on both sides, there has to be a sort of shared understanding that they will be coming at this from different approaches. And certainly from the farmer perspective, from my perspective, people in that position, they've got to embrace the whole thing. It's no good just seeing it as a money-making exercise. You've got to be able to really get to know and understand what the horse world might want as being part of your business, because you will come at it from different angles, and massive opportunities, Tim, for access and opening things up. And again, responsible use, really making sure that we embed the countryside code. We've got awful problems with dogs at the moment, both for the horse agenda and for farming. So I guess it's about all of us when we access the countryside, working, collaboratively together.
Okay. Thank you very much. I mean, just to pursue the diversification thing a bit more. I mean, you mentioned you've gone into livery things. How did you go about it? How did you try and get information about what you should do? Because having horses is actually quite different to having other farm animals.
It is, and I'm very keen from the National Farmers Union perspective, actually, that we look at this in much more detail going forward, so that we can provide, I represent 50,000 farming businesses across England and Wales, and I think there's a need for us to be able to provide support for widely diversified businesses, and horses being a key part of that. So advice is key. For me, I was lucky, Tim, in that I knew both sides very well. My background in horses was enormously helpful. And I think that's how a lot of farming families tend to go into these sorts of projects, is that, they either have wife, children, or themselves very involved in the horse side of things. So it's a natural progression and a natural interest for them. I think where things change and alter is if you've had no background with horses at all, you think that there's an opportunity to go into it, and then understanding the ramifications, insurance, all the risks associated as well, so that both sides are protected in all of this. Farms in the UK are quite different to farms in other parts of the world in that we live on them. Our health and safety record in agriculture is not great. It doesn't change. And so we really need and have to be able to work quite differently and be respectful of both sides, because we are different to other countries, and that's a great strength. But it also, is important to understand on both sides what you're getting involved in.
Lovely. Minette, thank you very much. Time has beaten us, I'm afraid. I do hope we can invite you back for future forum to get your views upon how things have developed in the strange new world that we're moving into. So thank you very much indeed.